As part of the Digital History Project, I am today talking with Bruce Ryan, who on Monday the 19th of July 1971, along with Cy Kendrick and Paul McGon, started the digital manufacturing plant in Merview, Galway. While that is the official startup date for digital, badge number 1, Mike Mulqueen, and a few others were already in at the back door. My name is Paddy Donoghue. Bruce, welcome and thank you for agreeing to participate in this project.
Well, thank you, Paddy. I'm really looking forward to it. It was a great experience, and look forward to discussing our time out there.
Okay, so you started in digital at age 25. That was 2 years before you came to Galway. What prompted you to join digital, and what did you do in the 2 years before you came to Galway?
Well, it's interesting, Paddy. My first experience with digital was before I actually joined. I joined in January '69. Well before that, I was driving into Boston one day, and I go through the tunnel into the city. And above the tunnel, there was this big billboard, and it said, "Digital Equipment Corporation, we define half the job, you define the other half." And it sort of got my eye, and I was working for a large, typical U.S. multinational at the time, pretty conservative, and I was young, and I was looking for, thinking about a new opportunity. And a while later, I got a call from a recruiter, and they said, "You want to go interview with this company, Digital Equipment?" And I thought maybe it was a watch company or something. I didn't know anything about them, and the digital watches were really coming out at that time. So I went over to see them, and remembering that billboard, and I met with the CFO, and I got the job offer, and it was pretty interesting, and to me looked like it was going to be a very exciting opportunity. They were an old mill in Maine and Massachusetts, an old mill town from years ago.
And as a style of company, was digital typical within the US? Different from
anything but typical. The environment there was very casual, very informal. If you bumped into Ken Olson, who was the CEO and founder, walking down the hallway, it was, "Hi, Ken." It wasn't Mr. Olson. It was a very untypical situation, which attracted me. I thought that looked exciting. They had sayings there, inside the company, "Give me the opportunity to fail, promote me until I fail, do the right thing, not a list of policies you had to follow to the letter," and that kind of thing. So that was very interesting.
What was the first move? Where did they send you first then?
Well, it was interesting. I was there like 3 weeks, and they came to me and said, "Would you like to go to Sydney, Australia? We need someone there for 3 to 6 months." And Sydney, Australia in those days was a long way away. And so, I talked to my wife, Kathy, about it, who was pregnant. And she said, "Well, let's go," but unfortunately the doctor said no. He had no idea what we were going to find down there. And he said, "No, you got to stay home." And so we decided I'd go off and do it. And it looked like a tremendous opportunity. It was the financial director had resigned. I had to replace him. And also had to get the books closed by the end of April that year. So off I went. And so that was digital. They took this young guy who came in. I guess I did okay in the first 3 weeks, and they asked me to go to Sydney. And I did. And then I was back in 2.5 months and got that assignment done. And so that helped me in terms of how I was viewed at digital. And I was coming back, working for the vice president of sales and the vice president of service. And they asked me to, about 2 years later, they came to me and they said, "How'd you like to go to Galway, Ireland?" And this time it's 2 years. And so, of course, this time Kathy's going, but also this time she was pregnant. And so she would have been like 6 or 7 months pregnant when we flew out to Ireland in July 17th exactly of that year. And so that's 1971. So that was a big decision for us to make. We had 2 little ones with a third on the way. The oldest was 3, getting ready to turn 4. The youngest was 1, turning 2. So, and the big challenge there was for Kathy, actually. This was a big move to a strange country. So we went off on a quick house hunting trip, and we had all of 3 days. You know, it was a holiday weekend in the US at the end of May. We left Friday night, had to be back in the office on Tuesday morning. Flew off to Galway, to Shannon, to Galway. Paul McGaughan, his wife Jolene, and his three boys, who were older than ours, were on that flight, and we're off to Ireland. So another exciting opportunity to the unknown for us.
So was it a welcoming environment that you found yourself moving into at that point?
Well, we flew in, we went out looking for a house and to rent for the 2 years. And some of the folks like Paul McGaughan and some others who were coming out were going up into the Renmore area. And so we thought it'd be great to get over there with Kathy pregnant, you know, leaving her friends and family behind, being connected there with some of the other women would be very good. So we rented a house, we thought, in Renmore there that weekend. Unfortunately, Monday morning when we get up, we get contacted by Tim Colleran, who was the real estate agent at the time. And Tim said he was sorry, but the people who own that home have decided they wouldn't rent it to you. So we don't have a house for you right at the moment. So that was a big letdown. And the reason was allegedly because we were Americans. And there's a little history to that we can talk about. So he did have a house over in Salt Hill. So we went over to Salt Hill on the top of Treadneedle Road there and found a house. We took that house and ran down to Shannon and caught that flight back to Boston. So that was the beginning for us, our first experience in Ireland.
And you just mentioned in passing there that there was a reason why they wouldn't rent you the house.
Yeah, it was interesting. Galway had a history. I'm sure it doesn't list also. Some American companies would come in, some multinationals would come in, and then and leave quite abruptly and not pay all their bills. So for some of the businesses, and I think some of the smaller businesses there in Galway, they weren't too excited about Americans coming in and renting their house and for a 2-year period and whether they'd ever get paid.
Okay.
So that was the background to that, evidently. And just by the way, when we did start there, I found out very quickly that some of those small businesses in Galway wouldn't accept anything but cash, and you know, for that reason. And so a big shock to us, but they wanted to be paid right when they delivered. And so we got over that pretty quickly, but that was an interesting, but not everybody in Ireland, not everybody in Galway had their arms wide open welcoming us into the country, but we got a great reception there.
Okay. Well, one brief question on background for you. With the name Ryan, there must be Irish roots somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. You know, a couple of generations removed on both sides came over to Ireland in the early 1900s. They grew up in the Irish section of Boston there in South Boston. Didn't have a lot of contact with the Irish other than through the family at that time. Certainly knew my Irish roots, sang all the right Irish songs on birthdays and celebrations. But I didn't have a big history with Ireland. So to me, this was new. And I think maybe the fact that my name was Ryan is why they asked me to go to Galway. One of the reasons.
Okay, right. Okay, if I just move on, and in a very general sense, I mean, digital culture is often spoken of and remembered warmly by any of us who worked there. And I have a brief story that reflects both you and the company to those who may not know you. But 2 months after you started, Kay Tighe joined Digital as Mike Mulqueen's secretary. She was 2 weeks in the job, handling the incoming stream of calls. And on this particular day, she was reluctant to take her coffee break. You were heading to the canteen and suggested that she needed a break too, but Kay felt she couldn't abandon the post. So you asked her what you needed to do to handle the calls, and after a brief induction, I gather you were a very quick learner. But armed with a pen and notebook, you took on the role and Kay got her coffee break. And you got your first career break by becoming Mike's secretary.
That's right.
Congratulations. Now, that story reflected a stark difference between the digital culture and the typical Irish experience of company culture up to then. How important was culture to digital corporately and for the Irish operation?
Well, culture was a huge part of digital. They started in a part of this old mill, which was actually multiple buildings 1 million square feet. Digital just had a part of it and eventually very quickly took over the whole mill. But it was an old brick mill. They used it to make blankets during the US Civil War in the middle of the 1800s. And Digital didn't do a lot to fix it up. I mean, they made it, so we could live in it or operate in it, but it was they kept that old style. And that was really helped dictate the culture of the company. Ken Olson had an office similar to, pretty similar to everybody else. And it was a first name basis, very casual, and very different from American companies at the time. And that was what attracted people. Some people get turned off. Some people liked it. But it really created the culture. And that's what we wanted to bring to Galway. We wanted to bring that informal, casual, give me the opportunity to fail kind of culture. People wanted to grow. They wanted to take on new roles. And that's what attracted us.
What was the final instruction or your last day instruction before you left the US to come to Galway?
Well, I was in that last day, and of course I was in a rush to get out. And Pete Kaufman, who was the vice president of manufacturing, who by the way made the decision to come to Galway, he did the negotiations with the Irish government, the IDA. He stopped down in my office and wishing me luck, and so I was walking away. He said, and by the way, he says, I don't know anything about your religion or what you believe in or what you don't believe in, but when you're in Ireland, you make sure you go to mass every Sunday when you want. That wasn't a problem for us. We did anyway, but we went to Galway Cathedral every Sunday. But that was understanding from Pete's standpoint, the culture of Ireland, certainly at the time, and we would make sure we were part of it, whether we liked it or not.
Now, there you made the comment about Pete being the one who did the original negotiations, but why did DEC choose Ireland in the first case, and then why Galway in the second?
Well, it started actually with Europe, and the company was growing very fast. It was a very hot company at that time, and business was growing in double digits regularly. So the decision was to go to Europe. We needed to have a manufacturing presence in Europe. That was the first one, and that was pretty easy. The second one was where? And there were lots of alternatives. Now, Ireland was doing a terrific job at the time through the government and through the IDA of attracting people to the country. And one of those big attractions was the financial incentives. But to Pete Kaufman, quite honestly, his interest was in the people, the workforce, location of where he would put a plant. He wanted an attractive location. And so that was his main interest, and certainly the financial, let's not downplay that, but that was a piece of it. But there were other places to go. And so he came over himself, toured the island, and he concluded Ireland was the right place. We did a lot of research, heard about this young workforce, well-educated, very low manufacturing presence in the country at the time, much of it around Dublin. And that was an attraction to us, have these young people. And we also knew that there were experienced people, if not living in Ireland, living in the US, living in Europe, who had moved out of Ireland for opportunity, and that they would come back for the right situation. And so we felt there was two kinds of very attractive people there. And it was his decision, along with Jack Shields, who ran service, and Jack Smith, who was a senior guy in manufacturing, that this was the right place. And Ken Olson supported that. And so we came off to Ireland. And then why Galway? Well, Galway met all that criteria, the west of Ireland. Most of the industry was over near Dublin. And interesting, we were told in our research, you don't want to go to Ireland. It's not the place to set up a computer factory of all things. And if you go to Ireland, you got to go to Dublin. Don't go to the west or the south. You got to go to Dublin where the infrastructure is. And so we didn't see it that way. We saw that as an opportunity. We saw it, and Pete and others saw Galway and said, this would be a great place to live. For the Americans coming over, but for the Irish, they'll be attracted to it. And so the decision was, let's go to Galway.
I heard somebody make the comment, a little bit ironically, perhaps, but nonetheless, that they were at the top of Threadneedle Road and looked down on a sunny day, one of those, and saw the sea and said, this is the place.
And it turned out our house was on the top of Threadneedle Road. And we had that view of Galway Bay. But
what was the local and the national infrastructure like from your point of view? What, like, how important was that support locally and nationally for you?
well, I think it was very important, obviously. And I went over as the financial director. And so the banking relationships there in Galway, as well as in Dublin, and et cetera, were very important to us. Galway, we had the Bank of Ireland there. They became one of our principal banks. We had banks in Dublin. And Dublin was, one of the advantages of Galway. It wasn't that far from Dublin. And then you could take the train over, which I did many times, or drive over. And so I wasn't involved in the final negotiations. Pete Kaufman did that over in Dublin. But one of the big pluses that Ireland had, they did very well, was the IDA. And you had the IDA obviously headquartered out of Dublin, but you had the IDA there in the west of Ireland. And it turns out their office was right across the street, right across the road from our buildings there in Merview. And Dennis McCarthy, and I think it was Tom, forgetting his name. Yeah, he was there. And they did a great job. And so welcoming us in, helping us, giving us information, giving us guidance, giving us an idea what was going on in the country. And so that was a big plus. But I will mention one of the smart things that Pete insisted on, wherever we opened a plant, particularly outside the country, the first person you hire is an HR director. And we hired Mike Mulqueen. And Mike had experience. Mike had been in Canada. Mike had been in Ireland. He was a very senior HR guy, but also could relate very well to our culture. And so we hired him, and he came in April that year. Him and a few others came in to start the company off, get the all the equipment into the building, set up the production lines before we arrived in July. So Mike played a significant role in orientating us, the Americans, but also to the culture of Ireland, integrating the digital culture with the Irish culture, and then doing a lot of interviewing virtually everybody in those early days who came in to make sure they fit in the Irish culture. So getting that person on board was critical. He did a great job. And that was the philosophy. Start with the HR, get the right people, and then we'll grow the business.
And we'll come back to some of those other people later on. But in terms of, from a corporate point of view, how was this operation different than other operations? Was it more autonomous or less autonomous?
Yeah, this is very different. Digital has started offshore with a plant in Puerto Rico. They ended up with two very large plants. They're very successful. And same philosophy. They went to the other end of the island from San Juan out into remote areas and built these two plants very successfully. Those two plants were orientated to what we call volume manufacturing. They were building parts and components and shipping them up to the US plants, who were completing the computers and the peripherals and the storage devices, and then shipping them out in systems to the customers. This is different. This was a plant that was going to be connected to the market, the European market. And our connection was going to be to the countries, to the country managers, to the customers of those country managers, a very different kind of orientation right in the market. And so part of our job was to connect to the management teams around Europe, the headquarters, which was in Geneva. And it was a market presence plan. And we did everything. We built product, we built components, we integrated them, we built peripherals, we brought in software. This was a total business, a new way to work for digital. And of course,
and how did you go about building credibility? I mean, Galway was nothing. How did you go from nothing to being central?
Well, it was interesting. Well, we started the plant. Let me just start with after about 2 months, in September, we were ready to ship our first product. And so Cy and I went over to Geneva, headquarters for Europe. They had a country managers meeting. They were all in, and we had all the countries. Digital was in, and then digital Europe was growing very fast. So we visited there with Jean-Claude Peterschmidt, who was the general manager of Europe. All the country managers were there. And so Cy and I made presentations. Here we are, we're in Galway. We're building computers, and we're going to start shipping them out to your countries. And we wanted to start with one or two. We didn't want to start with all the countries. And it was interesting. I gave a presentation, so I gave a presentation. We started some dialogue, and it was pretty obvious looking around the room from the body language, people weren't overly excited about this. They've been buying their computers from the US. Business was very good. They're having trouble getting them out on time. It was just so busy. And now this computer is going to be built in the west of Ireland and shipped into the countries instead of from the US. And there were some concerns about that, quite honestly. So we went around in discussion, and it was interesting. The country manager of Sweden raised his hand. He says, I've got a problem. I've got a big customer meeting coming up in 2 weeks. They're coming in. We've got our new, I think it was a P2P11 system, and I can't get product for it. Can you help us? And so Cy and I went out on a limb, and we said, of course we can. When do you need it? And he said, the event's in 2 weeks. He said, we'll get it out to you by next week. And he looked at us, he said, are you kidding? You're going to get the product to us next week? They said, no problem. We'll get it out to you next week. And we left the room and said, boy, we got to deliver now. And so we called Galway and said, here's the configuration, get it together. We delivered it the next week. And I'll tell you, the word got out around Europe very quickly. This Galway facility is for real. They can actually build product. And of course, that transformed into the other countries contacting us saying, hey, can you help us? We need help. So we had to keep it somewhat limited. And of course, the UK was the first place we started. And our first revenue shipment was in September, also to the UK.
Okay.
Well,
obviously, what was key to all of that was the caliber of people that you actually got on board. This was not a three-man operation. This was a team. How did you set about, given that there was no tech knowledge base to draw from?
That was an opportunity for us.
How did you go about it?
Yeah, it was an opportunity for us. Young, smart. The government made some great decisions in investing in education out there before we came. So we started in the, Mulqueen was a big role here. We started on the 19th of July there in 71. And those first 10 people were hired that Mike had found and brought in. And then every week after that, we were hiring a lot of people. And we hired some young people and we brought them in. And I remember that first day there, 10 people showed up, came in into the factory. I was very lucky. Michael had hired Marie Gahn to be the payroll manager. And so he turned her over to me and said, okay, here's your payroll manager. And Marie came in and she did that job, I think, for 20 years. And what a great job she did. And remember, we hired a lot of people, but we had on board over 1,000 people in the plant just in Galway. And then several hundred down in Clonmel eventually. So she did a great job. But you had people come in that first day. Mary Naughton was another one. She came into the plant. Mary was there in Galway for a while. She went up to Scotland when we opened the plant in Ayr. She transferred up there. She ended up in Geneva in a big planning role. She did a great job. She was an example. Marie was an example. John Henry, who was the supervisor on the floor there of the factory in those very early days, and others that came in. They came in. They loved the idea of the challenge. It wasn't formal, and we just kept bringing in these young people. There was a second level to that, or a very important part of it. We also knew there were some experienced people around. And so we went out looking also to bring in some experience. I'll tell you a funny story about Pat Sweeney. Kathy and I, of course, being there in Galway, we had to buy some crystal in Ireland. You can't come home without crystal. So I got to arrange so that I get over and get a tour of the Galway crystal factory, which was right there in Galway, an old factory, and get introduced to Pat Sweeney. Pat was the MD there at the Galway Crystal. So he gave us a great tour. We walked around the place, Kathy and I, and of course he did a good job selling us a lot of crystal. And he's a great guy. And so I came in the next morning, I said, Cy, you got to go over to Galway Crystal. You got to meet Pat Sweeney. He's a future plant manager of Galway with his crystal background. He's got to come in and make computers. So Cy went over, met Pat. Pat joined us right away. And Pat played a big role for us in Galway. He eventually transferred to the US. He had a very senior role in manufacturing in the US. He and his family had come over, and Pat was an example of the kind of people we found there in Ireland.
I gather you hired Kevin Melia, you hired him twice.
Well, yeah. Kevin was one of those young ones. He was a cost accountant. I think he was a chartered accountant, but he had worked in cost accounting. I hired him as a cost accountant. He came in, and Kevin had a tremendously successful career. He worked for us there. He left about a year after I left Digital in Ireland. Got in touch with me a year or two later and said he'd like to come back, and could he come? And we had a job from in the US. He came over with his family. It was going to be a 3-month assignment. We were getting ready to move a plant in France, which ended up not happening. But so he stayed in the US, became a very senior guy in the manufacturing organization at Digital. Eventually went on to Sun Microsystems, actually was the acting president there for a while, and set up his own company, worldwide company on contract manufacturing, very successful. Another example. Another one I'd mention, an Irishman, was a Cork man, Jim Forrest. He was working up at SPS, which was there on the industrial estate as the controller. And one day the bank had come in from Dublin to visit me, and we had a long discussion. I gave him a quick tour, and he went up to visit with SPS where Jim was. And he mentioned to him, Jim, you want to take a look at this digital company? I think they might be the future of Galway. And Jim got in touch with me, and we met, hired Jim. He came in as a controller and did a great job, fabulous job, building the finance organization and bringing in some young, some with experience, not some with not so much experience. And another example of that, Frank McCabe. Frank McCabe, who had been in the US. I remember the day we were over there, and Ken Olson stopped in for a very quick visit. And he was going down to Shannon, and we arranged for him to meet Frank. We had interviewed Frank. Frank was a very senior guy. And they met down to Shannon in the rain one day. And we hired Frank. And he also became the general manager of Ireland. And went on to the US, reported to the CEO in the US. And he went on Intel in Silicon Valley and came out there to Leaslip, is it? I always get the name wrong.
Yeah, that's where
Intel had one of their largest facilities. He was the managing director there.
So tell me, Bruce, like at the other end of the scale, in terms of putting in place manufacturing disciplines around a workforce who it might be new to, did you have some interesting challenges or stories around?
One thing we had to do is we had to have the discipline there. Digital was a very well-known company. Its stock was a very hot stock. The auditors, of course, were going to come in and audit us on a regular basis. And one of the things they did is at the end of the quarter, they would come in and make sure the cutoffs of shipments out the door, as we say, were done by midnight on the last day of the quarter. So we'd arranged that they'd come in the next quarter. So I told the people in manufacturing, this quarter, I'm going to be the auditors. I'm going to show up around midnight, and we're going to make sure that the shipments go out at midnight and none after that to count in this quarter's shipments and revenue. And so that was set up. I came in, quarter 12 that night, and I knew there'd be a couple of large systems on the floor, and they were going to have problems with them. And I could tell by the body language, they really didn't want to see me there. And so I walked in there a few minutes before 12 midnight, and I was talking to one of the manufacturing guys, and I noted on the wall the clock, and it was 2 minutes of 12. The two large systems are sitting there. There was no way they were going out. And so we're chatting there, and a few minutes later, I look back up at the clock, and it was still 2 minutes of 12. And the clock has stopped. And
there you are. I mean, we're in touch with the gods. When you're in trouble, time stands still.
So the clock stopped, but those two systems didn't make it. So that was the beginning of some discipline there around. You
also had a sort of an inventory story.
Oh yeah, same thing.
Moving
inventory every so many months. And Paul McGon, who came out with us, he was one of the Paul and myself and Cy and others. We went by ourselves there. he was doing the physical, very, very regimented physical. And so I had the auditor come out. They wanted to observe it. They wanted to check the counts, make sure they were accurate. So we're walking through the building, and you put cards on the inventory, and you'd say there's 12 units here or 10 units here or whatever. There's this large box sitting there in the middle of the floor. And there was a card on it that said 1. And so I walked over to it and I told them how disciplined we were. And then this was I think it was a large printer or something. It should be a pretty heavy box. So I just walked over and said, here's a printer. And I sort of kicked the box. And the box goes flying across the floor. And so we look at this and we say, this, look over and the card says 1. And the box is empty. So that raised an issue with the auditor. And so I had to explain my way out of that one, which I had a good excuse for it. But again, we had to put that discipline in place. And, that's not unusual for the startup of a facility. And the auditors had tremendous respect for Galway and how well the discipline was in place and how we ran it in the finance organization and in the manufacturing organization.
Okay, and now for troubles of a different kind. You were there from a political perspective. You were there at the height of the political troubles in the North. Did that have any impact on you?
Well, it was an issue, it was really an issue for our family and friends back home. They seemed more worried about it than we were. Galway was a very comfortable place. And sure, there were issues around, we went to Dublin for Christmas and we had to leave the department store because of a bomb scare. You had those kind of issues. But we really took it pretty easily. The wives, the workers. Except there was one incident that I'll mention. We had shipped in a large computer. Digital's largest computer was a PW10. And that was going to be used to do all our commercial computing, manufacturing, finance, et cetera. And so that had shipped in. It was in the front of the building. And it was all glass there. It was glass in the front so you could see in. And the fellow who had written a lot of the software, the commercial software for that computer, flew over. He came in that morning overnight, first trip to Ireland, Charlie McHale, a great guy. I met him, he came up, I brought him up to the factory and, we walked into the front there and there was the computer and said, it's in the crates. We'll get it out, opened up tomorrow and we'll get going. And just as I said that, the door flies open and in comes the security guard and he yells at us, get on the floor, get on the floor. Well, in that time, you get on the floor when they told you to. And so he says, crawl over to the windows. So we crawl over to the windows. Of course, Charlie just arrived on Ireland for his first time. So the security guard says, there's a man across the street. There's a little knoll there up beside the IDA building. And he said, he's got a high-powered rifle. Now you stay where you are. I'll go in back and get a hold of the guarder. I guess they have the special guarder there. So he crawled out to the back of the building. The guarder came up. We stayed down low. And of course, when they got there, the person, whoever it was gone. So that was sort of an introduction to the problem there, certainly for Charlie, but for ourselves. And it created a little tension. The next morning, oh, by the way, that was, it turned out, and we didn't know it at the time, that was Bloody Sunday up north in Derry. And we were, I had picked him up and we didn't know that it was happening. 14 people, I think, were killed. So the next morning, Cy and I and Paul and Michael, we met in Cy's office and there was a National Day of Mourning declared. I think it was on Wednesday that week. I may be wrong on that, but there was no issue on our part. We would close the factory for the National Day of Mourning. And as we're having that discussion, in comes the head of the security group. And he just walked in, he said, I just want to let you know that I've been talking to people downtown, that if you decide to be open on the National Day of Mourning, we won't be here. And of course, that decision had already been made, but it gives you an idea of the environment, the concerns were around Galway at the time, around the island, around Ireland at the time. So, of course, that got people back home real nervous. We took it well there. We did get concerned. We worried about, should we get the wives out? Should we get the children home? But we didn't do that and didn't see a need to, and there was no need to, but it certainly was a tense time. And so, I think we were more relaxed living in Ireland than the people back home were.
Yeah, which is often the case. So you came to the end of your assignment. So when did you leave Galway and what did you do with yourself very briefly just after?
Well, I left Ireland. We both left after the 2-year assignment in June that year. Just one observation, as I was getting ready to leave, we had built the plant up in Ballybrit. And that was a large plant. And I can remember just leaving and looking back, I said, looking at the parking lot full of cars. And I thought, when we started, it was all bicycles. And here we are now today, it's full of cars. And so that was sort of what had happened over those 2 years. And of course, we had hundreds and hundreds of employees on board. And so I left at that time, and Kathy, and it was funny, people ask Kathy, we come back and say, well, how did you like living in Ireland? And we just got asked that question recently at a wedding. Someone had just been in Ireland, had been in Galway, loved the area, and said, well, what was it like to live there in those days? And so Kathy always said the same thing, when I first went out, I was 6 months pregnant. It was difficult. I wasn't that happy there initially. But I'll tell you, when it came time to leave, I didn't want to go. So, she went through that transition. And I just mentioned quickly here, for the man that was working in the factory, is what we did back home. For the woman, it was totally different, a totally different environment. And they had to get through that. And they were the important part of this that made it work so well for the Americans who came out. And I think the woman deserved a lot of credit. Of course, Kathy had the baby there in October, and our son just turned 50 years old on October 11th. Patrick, Andrew, Ryan, and Michael and Christopher, of course, were the older kids, and they were 4 and 2 when we left. And Patrick was, Patrick was 2. He'd just been born. Yeah. So anyway, I came back to digital. I came back into manufacturing. Had a long career there. I was there 25 years. I was reporting to the CEO there. I had been in finance most of my career. I did move over, ran a $3 billion business there towards the end, and had a tremendous, very good career there at Digital. And Digital, of course, grew and became the second largest computer company. Plenty of opportunities.
What impact do you think now, looking back, what impact did you think overall that Digital had outside of its own bubble? But what impact do you think it left?
Well, when you step back from it, in 1970, Ireland was the bottom rung of the top 20 industrial companies. And much of the business was around Dublin. And we've been told to go to Dublin with that factory. Less than a generation later, 1990, Ireland was number 1 in income per person, per capita, in the top 20. A huge transition took place in Ireland. Digital can't take credit for that, but we were the first ones in the high-tech world. You had the pharmaceutical companies, the medical companies. They all came in, and Ireland did a tremendous job in recruiting them in. They also made a transition around the mid-'80s to really focus not only on the multinationals, but also on the local businesses, entrepreneurialism, starting up small companies, and really supporting that effort. And that was tremendously successful right there in Galway. We went over 1,000 people there. We were the first to do that. I think today there's 6 companies. There are over 1,000 people in Galway. And a lot of smaller companies, people who used to work at Digital, started up companies there in Galway, and other people. So we don't take credit for all of that. But I like to think we started laying the first bricks for that, what would become the Celtic Revolution or the Celtic Tiger.
Yes.
And of course, all those other companies contributed to
the
that.
revolution has yet to come. Bruce, we're coming near the end, but my curiosity is stirred by that lovely looking desk that is behind you.
Oh,
I gather there is a history to it.
Yeah, just a quick story on that. I noted one day we were there that an ad in the local paper, there was a parish, I think it was the pastor, one
Parish priest.
Well outside of Galway, and he was trying to sell a roll-top desk. And so I drove out there quickly and met him, and I paid a ridiculously low price for it. But we've had it, of course, it was our souvenir. So we came home with, most tourists go to Ireland, and most Americans, they come back with shamrocks and Irish sweaters. you know, we came back with our share of Irish sweaters, but we came back with the roll top desk, and we came back with our crystal, and we came back with, you know, a lot of memories there.
Okay, it's a nice looking. Now, I also believe that you got a silver salver with 2 inscriptions on it.
Yeah.
And would you
I
like
have it
to
here.
give an airing? Okay, so that's lovely.
That was a
Now,
gift.
now we want to hear, Bruce, from your own lips.
Well,
What's
you know, this is
written on
going
it?
to be an
What's-
embarrassment to the Irish language. You know, and
That suits us perfectly.
I asked forgiveness before I even say anything, and let's say it much better than I. But
Give it a shot.
let me try to read it off the tray here, off the salver. It was Schlock, Slancha on Slancha, the best I got it.
Yeah, we'll send the emergency services around to you quickly.
My apologies.
What
to
it
you.
says is schlicht schlachta or schlicht vor schlachta, which says, may your children's children have many children.
Well, we had an Irishman while we were there. We had 3 children, Michael, Chris, and Pat, and we have 5 fabulous grandkids. So it worked.
Well, look at, it's time for me to renew our thanks to you, both for your historical contribution and for your support today and participating in this discussion. It has been a pleasure talking with you, Bruce. Míle buíochas agus.
One final comment, if I could make it.
Right.
You know, I'm going to be out there in April, and I'll see you there in April, Patty. And we're going to have the 50th anniversary celebration, which is a little late due to the COVID stuff. But you know, how many companies 25 years after closing down for good reasons, technology took over, we'll get together 25 years later and celebrate. And we'll, you know, we had 500 people there when we did the 45th, and we'll have a big crowd there for the 50th. It says a lot about the culture there in Ireland, and the culture that digital brought there, and putting them together. So
Yeah,
that's going to be exciting, and I think it says a lot about our time there in Ireland.
look forward to seeing you there, and I'm sure a lot of your old colleagues would equally look forward to seeing you, Bruce. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Patty.
you. Right, bye-bye.